Hello and welcome to the Ciao Flower Shop mini album tutorial series designed for scrap and create. If you are just joining the tutorial series, don't forget to check out the links in the description box below where you will find the links for all of the papers and the other supplies that I am using from the Scrap and Create website to create this album. Let's get into the tutorial. In today's tutorial, we are going to work on building the cover for our album. So from the heavyweight chipboard, you need to cut one piece to 2.5 by 8.5 for the spine. And then you'll need two pieces that measure 7 inches by 8.5 inches for the covers. Now from your cardstock, you're going to need two pieces that measure 8 inches by 9.5 inches. Now I drew a horizontal line here across the bottom of my paper, 1/2 inch from the bottom edge on both of my pieces. This will just be a guideline, so I'll show you what I'm going to do with those later. Then we'll need one piece that measures 4.5 by 9.5, and the same thing, I drew a 1/2 inch horizontal line across the bottom section of my piece. Then I have one piece that measures 4.25 by 8 3/8 of an inch. And next I have a piece that measures 2.5 by 8.25 and a piece that measures 3.5 by 8.25. And these are for our hinges, so we're going to score these next. Now for both of my hinges, I'm going to put the smaller sides on the scoring board and I'm going to score these at 1/2 inch intervals down the entire piece. Same thing with my 3.5 inch piece. I'm going to put the 3.5 inch side along the scoreboard and I'm going to score at 1/2 inch intervals across the entire piece. For these pieces, I'm going to go on my first score line and I'm going to miter the ends on these 1/2 inch sections, just like we do on the 1/2 inch tabs on our pages, but we're only doing it to the end pieces and leaving the rest. Now I'm going to set these pieces aside for now. I'm going to set aside my two smaller pieces. I'm going to bring in my larger pieces and we're going to start wrapping our covers. I'm going to take my piece of cardstock, make sure that the line that I've drawn is at the bottom. Then I'm going to take one of my cover pieces and I'm going to apply my adhesive to the back side. Now, if you are using double-sided tape, if that's what you prefer, you can use this here too, but make sure that you have a lot of tape on this so that this does stay down really well. Now, if you're using wet adhesive like I am, you want to make sure that you have this back cover, but you don't want to use too much adhesive where it starts to warp your paper either. Once I have my adhesive on, I'm going to go ahead and use my guideline to adhere this down so that there is a 1/2 inch border around all 4 sides of my cover. Now it's okay if it's not exactly a 1/2 inch, but this will be much easier if it is close to a 1/2 inch on all 4 sides. So I like to go ahead and rub from the back side as well, just to make sure that all that glue is smoothed out really well. Next, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to be mitering my corners, but I need to leave about 1/8 of an inch past that corner so that whenever I fold these edges up, it will wrap those corners and those bare corners won't be exposed. Once I have those corners cut out, I'm going to just go ahead and fold my ends over to get them started. And then I'm going to start, I always start with my smaller edges. I'm going to use my bone folder to burnish right down that edge to get it tight, and then on top just to crease that paper. Then I'll do the same thing over here on this side. I'm going to open those up, take my adhesive, and I'm going to apply my adhesive to this entire 1/2" tab area. Then I'm going to fold this back up over, and I'm going to use my bone folder again to make sure that this is really tight up against that edge, and then across the top. Then I'm going to take my adhesive here on the second 1/2" tab and do the same thing. Now I'm going to wrap those corners, so I'm going to take my bone folder and press that paper right up against that edge. So basically run it right off the edge and press that corner down. So you should be able to see it looks like this. Then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So just tucking that paper right around those corners. And then I'm going to fold this one again and then use my bone folder to burnish this so that it's nice and tight and crisp up against that edge. Then I'll go ahead and add my adhesive to one of those 1/2" tab sections. And now I will wrap this right over top, and just repeating what we did on the first two sides, just pressing this nice and flat. But then I'm going to take my bone folder in those corners and make sure that those corners are nice and flat against that chipboard. Then I'll repeat with the fourth side, adding my adhesive first to my 1/2" tab section. And then I'm going to just wrap this right around that cover, pressing up against the side and securing it to the top. Then I will take my bone folder in these corners and press this around so that it will lay flat. So now I have my cover completely wrapped. You'll want to go ahead and do the same thing to your second cover, following that same process. Now, once you have both covers done, you'll want to go ahead and set those aside. Now you're going to bring in your piece that measures 4.5 by 9.5 and your chipboard spine piece. We're going to first place our spine on that the cardstock piece. So we want to apply adhesive to our spine section first. And then I am going to be applying this down here. And there is about an inch, actually there is an inch on each side, and then a 1/2 inch on top and bottom. So we need more on the sides because these are going to become little wings that are going to help us to attach the spine to our front and back covers. So once this is on, I'm going to take my short ends and I'm going to fold them first. And then I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm going to run it across this edge. And then I'm going to flatten this out and hold this. Now I'm going to press my bone folder down and crease this paper right along the edge of that chipboard and then press down. I'm going to do the same thing here, pressing right along the edge and then pressing down to crease the rest of that paper. Now what you will see is these angle just slightly down, and that's what we want. I'm going to do the same thing here. First, I'm going to burnish this so it's nice and flat across, and then I'm going to press the paper down next to the spine chipboard and then flatten that little wing or tab section out. Now I'm going to go ahead and open both of these up, and I will place my adhesive on the entire 1/2" tab section. And then I'm just going to repeat what I did with my bone folder, first flattening that center part down and then pressing those wings down flat. Then I will do the same thing with this other side, adding my adhesive first to my 1/2" tab section. Pressing those sides nice and flat. Once I have that, I'm going to flip over to the outside. I'm going to take my bone folder and just carefully at first, I'm going to run it right along the edge of my chipboard to crease that paper. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, just to crease that paper along that spine piece. Now when you flip over on the back, these pieces will be flat with that spine section. Next, I'm going to start assembling the pieces together. So I like to use my ruler for this step to make sure everything lays flat. I'm going to start by adding my adhesive here to one of my tabs and being very careful that I do not go onto my spine section here. So keeping it only in that 1" section here, that little wing. But I want this whole entire piece to be covered with my adhesive. And now I'm going to lay this up against my ruler, and I'm going to take one of my covers and I'm going to set it right on here, right next to that spine section. And I'm going to use my ruler to make sure that they are flat across. You don't want there to be any space between your cover and your spine piece. So this is not like when you do the wrap method and you leave that space. This one is the lay flat method, and that will stay completely next to each other. And when you bend the cover, it will be perfect when it's in the book form. Now I'm going to turn mine around because it'll be easier for me to add my next piece. I'm going to add my adhesive here on the second tab section. Again, being very careful that I don't get my adhesive on that spine section. Now I'm going to take my final cover. Again, using my ruler, I'm going to make sure that all 3 of these pieces lay flat against the ruler, and I'm going to make sure that my cover is right up against the spine, no gaps. Now once these are attached, I will go ahead and flip over, and then I'm just going to burnish from the inside. And then I'm going to take my 4 1/4 by 8 3/8" piece, and I'm going to be placing this here right over top of my spine section to cover my cardstock. So once the adhesive is on, I'm going to go ahead and lay this down. It's going to be 1/8 inch smaller on each side than the piece that's already on there. And then it's going to be just a little tiny bit smaller top and bottom. And I'm just going to make sure that this is adhered down really well. So I'm just going to burnish this nice and flat. Now I'm going to set this aside and let this dry before I bend this. And as I do this, I am going to work on my hinges. Now I'm going to take my hinge pieces and fold on my score lines. Now I like to start in the center and work outward, and I hold these so that the paper doesn't shift and these folds will be nice and straight. So I'm just going to fold on all of these score lines in both directions. So once I have all of them folded first one way, I'm going to flip this piece over, and then I'm going to fold and burnish in the opposite direction. And this is going to allow my pages to move a little bit easier whenever I do turn them in my album. I'm going to do the same thing with my larger hinge, starting in the center and then burnishing all of these folds in both directions. I'm going to take my smaller hinge and find the middle ½ inch section of it, apply my adhesive to the entire back side here in this ½ inch section only. Once I have my adhesive on there, I'm going to apply this to the ½ inch section in the middle of the larger hinge. Now I'm going to use these score lines to line everything up so that everything is straight. I'm going to just double check on this side, and once everything is good, I will hold this down and burnish this. Now I'm going to set my hinge piece aside for a minute and bring my cover back in. And I'm going to take my bone folder first. I'm just going to lift up just slightly, and I'm going to run my bone folder between those creases, in the crease between the spine and the front cover. And then I'm just going to slowly start to lift up as I do this. Then I'm going to do the same thing between the spine and the back cover. If you see your paper starting to lift up at all, that means your adhesive isn't dry yet. You want to wait until it's completely dry to do this. So I'm just going to lift up. And then I'm going to erase these just to get those out of there so you don't see that. And you shouldn't have that unless you mark your pieces. Now I'm going to fold mine completely flat. So now I have my book form. Now I'm going to go ahead and place my spine piece in the book. So you're going to need to find the 3 center sections. That's what you are going to be adhering down. You're going to need to mark your spine. It's going to be 1½ inches. So from the center, it's going to be 3/4 inch. So I'm just going to mark on top and bottom. And then I'm going to take my adhesive here and apply adhesive to the entire 1½ inch section on the back side. So once I have my adhesive on, I'm going to go ahead and line up the top and the bottom here, and there will be 1/8 inch at the top and 1/8 inch at the bottom edge, or between the edge of the hinges and the top and bottom of the album. So it's 1/8 inch smaller on each side. Once I have it down, I'm going to just go ahead and burnish this really well. And I like to fold my hinges in both directions and burnish this down just so that I know the whole entire thing is really adhered to my spine. If you see any pieces lifting, you want to go ahead and apply more adhesive if that's the case. Now I have all of my hinges in my album and it's ready to go. Now I'm going to cover these pieces on the spine before I do anything else because it's much easier when there's nothing else on the album. I have this 12 by 12 paper here that I am going to use to do this. There was a piece down one side that I cut that was, I think, 4.5 inches wide, and I also had to cut a couple of strips from the side. So I want you to be careful on how you cut this paper. So you are going to need 13 of these strips. They measure 3/8 by 8 1/4. Now I'm going to ink my edges before I put these on, but basically you are going to put one strip here, and then you're going to put one strip here on all of these flat sections. You're going to skip the piece that has the mitered corners where the page goes, but all these sections in between, you're going to put your strips of paper, and then you're going to put one here in the front before the hinges begin. All of my pieces are now on my spine, so everything is covered. Now I would normally decorate the inside and outside before I put my pages on, but because of the style of this album, I think I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I'm actually going to construct this a little bit differently. We're going to put the pages in first because I think I might build up something here since we have that little tiny page to keep the book more balanced. So I'm going to start, I'm going to bring in my pages here and I'm going to flip them upside down. I'm going to put page number 4 on first since it is the larger of the two or of the 4 pages. Now I'm going to apply my adhesive on both sides of my 1/2 inch tab on the hinge here to get started. And if you are using double-sided tape, just make sure that you have this whole entire piece covered. That way the page is stuck on the hinge really well. So once I have my adhesive on my hinge, then I'll go ahead and take page number 4, going to open up that pocket between the front and back of the page, and I will slide this down right onto the hinge, and it shouldn't be able to go any further than that score line. So once it hits that score line, go ahead and burnish this down. And make sure that both sides can press in to get this adhered really well to that hinge. Then I'm going to repeat that same process with the 3rd hinge, first placing my adhesive on both sides of the hinge. Now I'm taking page 3, I need to open it up to the pocket between the front and back and slide that right down over my hinge. Once it gets to that score line, go ahead and press it closed. Double check and make sure the back side is lined up appropriately as well. And then press the page firmly onto the hinge. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with page number 2, starting with applying my adhesive to both sides of my hinge. For page number 2, I'm going to find that pocket between the front and back and place it down over the hinge all the way to the score line, and pressing it closed, double checking on the back side to make sure that this is down. Now, these are pretty thick pages, the first 2 especially, so I want to make sure that I'm adhering these down really well. And then we've got page number 1. So I'm going to apply my adhesive to both sides of my hinge first. Now I'll find the pocket between the front and back of this tiny little page and slide it right down over my hinge. This one is tiny, it's kind of hard to get on here. Once I have that on, I will go ahead and press down. Make sure both sides are flush with that score line. And press that down. So now I'm just going to fold all of my pages over, and you'll see that there's a pretty big, steep drop off here. Now, when I put my album this way, there's plenty of room, especially because there's no pages here. So normally there would be more bulk here and it wouldn't be as difficult or as big of a drop. So I'm thinking that I'm going to build up a feature here that will hit some of this second page and stop that cover from going down so much. So it'll be a little bit flatter. Now the first piece that I cut for the inside front cover measures 4.5 by 8.25. I scored this at 1/2 inch on the 4.5 inch side along the left side, and I've mitered my corners. I'm going to fold on my score line. I've cut another piece to 3.25 by 6 inches. On the 6-inch side, I scored at 1/2 inch across the top, and I mitered those corners on that tab. Then I've cut another piece to 4.25 by 4 inches. I've scored 1/2 inch on 3 sides. So on the 4.25 inch side, I've scored at 1/2 inch and 3 3/4. I'm sorry, and then on the 4-inch side, I scored at 1/2 inch along one edge. Now I've mitered the corners on these sides, and then I cut straight through the corners where there was that cross to remove all of that extra paper. So on this one, I'm just going to be folding on my score lines to create a pocket. And we haven't created another pocket in the album like this because I don't typically need that much room, but I want this pocket to expand so I can put several things in it. So that's why I do have that extra space. I'm going to start with my 4.5 by 8.25 inch piece. I will be placing my adhesive on this 1/2 inch tab section, and then I'm going to be creating a large pocket on the page as the base build. So this is going to go over here. I'm going to leave 1/8 of an inch on top and bottom, and about 1/16 of an inch from the edge of my album cover. And then I'm just going to burnish this down. Next, I'm going to take my pocket piece, apply my adhesive on all 3 of my 1/2 inch tabs for my pocket. And then this, I'm going to create a pocket and a flap that will keep that pocket closed and protected. So with this one, I'm going to place it down here, and I'm going to place it on the left edge of my flap. So there will be extra room here. And then once my flap or my pocket is on, I'm going to apply adhesive to my flap. This is going to be the closure, or I guess you should say the top part of my pocket. This will keep this closed. And I'm going to line up the edge of my score line with the top edge of this larger flap, and then make sure my sides are straight with my pocket, and then burnish this down. Now I'm only going to be cutting 2 pieces for the back cover. The first one measures 4 inches by 8.25. I have scored this on the 4-inch side at 1/2 inch down the right-hand side. I've mitered my corners, and I will fold on this score line. Then the second piece measures 4.5 inches by 8.25 inches. I've scored on the 4.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on the left-hand side. I've mitered those corners and I'm going to fold on this score line. I'm going to start with my 4-inch piece, placing my adhesive on this 1/2-inch tab section. And this piece I'm going to be placing on the edge of my cover here on the right side. And just like on the inside front cover, I'm going to leave a very small, about a 1/16 of an inch gap between the actual edge and where I start my flap. Then I'm going to take my 4.5-inch piece. I'll apply my adhesive here to my 1/2-inch tab section. And this piece is going to go on the left-hand side. And I'm going to open this one up first. Then I'm going to be placing this one here, but I want to make sure that I do not get this in the score line. So again, or in that fold line. So I'm going to leave about a 1/16 of an inch. And once that piece is on, I'm going to close this flap so that the top and the bottoms are straight across, and then I'm going to burnish this down. This I'm going to turn into a pocket, and then this is going to be like the cover, so this will open up as a pocket, and I'll put some photo mats in there. So that is it for this part of the tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will go ahead and decorate the inside and outside of our covers. So stay tuned for that. And if you are just joining the tutorial series, don't forget to check out the links in the description box below. They'll take you to the Scrap and Create website where you can purchase all of your Ciao Flower Shop papers and the flowers that I'll be using to decorate my album. I'll see you in the next tutorial.